A very warm welcome to Voice of America's Washington studio. I'm your host, Aman Azhar, and today my guest is a former U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan, Cameron Munter, who has had the first-hand experience of steering this often rocky relationship between Islamabad and Washington. Ambassador Munter, thank you for your time. Now, let me fire away with my first question. What, in your opinion, motivated India to end the relative autonomy of Kashmir in the manner that it did?
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to VOA. It's really a pleasure to be with you. You know, to go and talk to the motivations of the Indians, I hate to punt that to you, but you have to go to the Indians for that. From the outside, it seems to me that the events that might have inspired the response by the Indian government are first, the re-election of Mr. Modi. That is to say, his strengthening of his position and a decision to move ahead on the relationship of India with the Kashmir province and to reassess the constitutional order there. The second may have been the result of the terrorist attack that took place earlier this year and a feeling somehow among Indian leaders that the status quo is untenable. If indeed, the goal of Mr. Modi is to really change the relationship of the country to India, I would wonder what is the strategic vision? What kind of place? Is this to be a state like all other states in India? Where does the BJP government want to go? Mr. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has made some rather sharp criticisms, saying perhaps this is an effort to try to pit Hindu interests against Muslim interests, things of this sort. So it's a very dangerous question. At this point, trying to figure out where India is going.
Does this posturing also speak of India's desire to be the hegemon in the region? Something, given that the United States also is a strategic partner of India, and there's been a talk about India as a counterweight to China.
I would say that seems a little far-fetched to me, the idea of India seeing itself as a hegemon. It's much more, I sense, a question about a problem that has not been solved over the years, a problem that has been a difficult issue domestically and foreign for India, for Pakistan, for China, obviously with the wars that have been fought there. So that rather than phrasing this as an Indian bid for hegemony, I would much more say that for whatever reason, India has decided that it wants to address this issue that has been unsolvable since 1947. And despite has been the cause of all kinds of tension.
Sure, but looking at China, they have come out with this issue that they have problem the way Ladakh region has been annexed with India. So it is prompting that kind of a regional divide nonetheless. Would you not agree?
No, there's no doubt that any effort to try to change the status of Kashmir is going to have after effects in China, in Pakistan, even in the United States. That is to say, it's an untenable situation. It's a situation where there are great tensions. India is expending a lot of effort to keep the peace with its military there. This is a big burden for India. It's not clear to me what the strategic goal, the vision of where Kashmir will be in the future from the Indian side. It's not clear to me, and I think once that becomes clear, it may be easier for other players to respond.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has recently said in an interview that there is no use to negotiating with India, and his posturing has been taken as pleasing. So do you think the two countries gain anything by not talking? Is there a new normal here?
Well, I'm very sad to hear that. I was actually quite impressed that when Imran Khan first came to power, he made an effort to try to reach out a hand to India. Now, it couldn't be seen by many in the Indian government or in the Indian leadership that their long-term demand that Pakistan disassociate itself and do what it can to stop the sponsorship of terrorism, that they said, Imran Khan is making a gesture, but what we really want to see is an effort to try to rein in groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and other groups. But there's no doubt, a year ago, Imran Khan wanted at least to begin dialogue. As a diplomat, I'm always a fan of dialogue. It seemed perhaps that Mr. Modi might take him up on that, and there was a time when there might have been a chance for this dialogue. And one of the sad things that's happened over the recent months is that the efforts by Imran Khan to at least begin dialogue seem to have ended, and now his language is much harsher. It's understandable that in both countries, the leaders, Mr. Modi in India and Mr. Imran Khan in Pakistan, have constituencies before whom, a couple of months ago, he seemed more optimistic than many others in Pakistan or in India that he might be able to have a dialogue. And I give him credit for at least trying to start that dialogue, whether or not from the Indian side it was seen sincere or not.
Now, does this recent move by India on Kashmir in any way pose challenge to U.S. and Pakistan relationship, in your opinion?
Well, it's a very complex situation. And as you well know, the main thing that seems to be on the mind of American security experts is the discussions that are taking place about the future of the American and indeed the NATO presence in Afghanistan. So as America focuses on Afghanistan, the security elements of Afghanistan, there has been a dialogue, and this was the main element of the dialogue between President Trump and Imran Khan when he visited Washington, about whether Pakistan can help in making sure that there is a solution that is sustainable and acceptable in Afghanistan. Now, in such a case, those Indians who are but again, as people on both sides in Islamabad, in New Delhi, anticipate what will happen, the question of Afghanistan and the endgame in Afghanistan looms large in both of their minds.
Right. However, Pakistan has been quite consistent in saying that it's linking whatever happens in Afghanistan to what happens on its eastern border. So do you think in coming days there's going to be a strategic shift in Islamabad's view of the region, despite the assurances given by Prime Minister Khan to Mr. Trump?
Well, it's interesting to me that in his public statements over the last couple of days, Imran Khan has talked about the fear he has that there will be a false flag terrorist incident, a terrorist incident that would be provoked by India itself in India to try to ratchet up the tension in the region. I think that the amount of distrust that has grown in the last few months has made it possible for people on all sides to suspect the intentions of others. In India, one hears very often, well, Imran Khan may be a good man, but he does not control the army and the ISI, and the army and the ISI have other plans. You hear in Islamabad that the Indians are simply not going to give any credit to any effort by the Pakistanis and are going to simply stiff arm something that it shouldn't do, that it makes for some difficult planning. And in this sense, it would be great if objective people from the outside could help to mitigate the India-Pakistan tension. That doesn't seem to be happening right now.
Ambassador Munter, is there any real threat of war between these two countries?
In my mind, the threat is one of accidental war. I mean, that is to say, the notion that, for example, for a domestic audience, one side or the other would want to teach the other side a lesson. And once you start teaching other sides a lesson, as what happened earlier this year when there were plane strikes that went back and forth to each other, things can get out of hand. You'll notice that, for example, when the Indian planes attacked Pakistan earlier this year, there were no casualties on the ground. There were no bombing casualties. Had there been bombing casualties, it would have been much harder for Pakistan to back down. The same is true. If Pakistan were to demonstrate militarily its commitment to Kashmir by doing something on the ground, where people are gesturing back and forth, especially military gestures, the prospect of two nuclear-armed countries making a mistake and perhaps beginning a very serious conflict, they grow. And I think this worries people around the world, and people should be worried, yeah.
Pakistan has recently, it actually went to the National Security Council, and you know what happened there. And now certain calls came out of Islamabad that they're considering going to International Court of Justice. How sound is Pakistan diplomatically on this front?
Well, you know, there's always an effort in the international community to believe that negotiation, that talks, that creative solutions are the way to deal with any problem. As a diplomat, this was always something that we wanted to think about when we had a problem. How do you, as you would say, expand the aperture? How do you change things to try to come up with a solution? But this does run up against a long-term and consistent Indian position that this is not the business of other countries. And so it's very hard, no matter how much Pakistan gets a conversation at the UN Security Council or brings in the International Court of Justice, as long as India believes that this is an internal affair that is for India to solve, it's going to be very difficult for that to have a practical effect.
Right. Turning attention to Afghanistan, Ambassador Munter, you must be following what's going on under the lead of Mr. Khalilzad. Are you hopeful that something might be on the horizon with regards to any kind of a peace deal?
There's good and there's bad. There's always good when people are talking about putting together a peace deal. And Ambassador Khalilzad is a very able man, a very energetic man who has worked very hard to try to cobble something together. This was something that even 10 years ago when I was ambassador in Pakistan, we were always making efforts to reach out to the Taliban, to the other side, to try to figure out whether that war, which has gone on for 18, almost 19 years, whether that war can be solved by negotiation, as almost most wars are. Here's the downside, however, of that. One of the problems is that the legitimate government, the elected government, the recognized government of Afghanistan is not yet at the table. And until the Afghans can talk to the other Afghans, that is the Taliban talking with the Afghan government, there's a lack of legitimacy. And that has to happen at some point. The government of Ashraf Ghani, for all of its failings, is the legitimate government of the country. So that's one. Another is the question of whether the security situation there is stable enough. This has been the conundrum of the Americans. Is it stable enough for the Americans to engage in the withdrawal, which the newspapers have reported is part of the deal, and in fact the sine qua non of the Taliban? Is it a situation that is stable, or as some people fear, are we going to see a repeat of what happened in the 1990s? So there are very serious problems. Even though we're optimistic and it's good to try to negotiate to end a war, it's always good to try and negotiate to end a war. We have to take into account the legitimate interests of the government of Afghanistan have to be taken into account, and that the security system cannot be left, the security situation cannot be left to simply to whim or to the possibility that the kind of civil war that took place in the 1990s could be repeated.
Do you feel that Washington is ready to accept Taliban as a reliable partner in all this? And also, do you think Taliban can guarantee what they can do or what they've been asked to do in Afghanistan, especially with regards to ISIS and not letting any other terrorist group safe havens in that country?
Yeah, this has to do with a very fundamental question. Can you trust the Taliban? Many in Washington do, many in Washington don't. The difficulty is if indeed the Taliban are saying, let's say, that some of the civil rights of people, specifically women, in Afghanistan would be protected under a new arrangement, this would be something that would be very important, but we just don't know if it would happen. Similarly, would they make sure that they broke with al-Qaeda, with ISIS, when in fact they were not willing to break with al-Qaeda and ISIS back in 2001. So you put your finger on a question that no one can really answer, but that everyone asks, which is, can you trust them to do what they say? Do they have the power to do what they say? Very often in this part of the world, you have this choice between conspiracy and incompetence. That is to say, are they all powerful and able to make decisions, or are they not as powerful as we might think? Don't forget, this has been an excruciatingly difficult war for the Taliban, as well as for everyone else in Afghanistan. So the question comes, are they able to keep their word? Are they interested in keeping their word? No one really knows. But you are right that we seem to be coming closer, at least from press reports, to an agreement that would lead at least to a partial withdrawal of the Americans, and we hope an arrangement that would lead to a sustainable peace in Afghanistan.
Right. Ambassador Munter, towards the end of this conversation, I have to ask, in all that we have spoken about and discussed right now, what trajectory do you see for the bilateral relationship of the United States and Pakistan, which is off again, on again? What do you think? Where is this headed?
I think there's a chance for it to get better. I mean, in the time that I was there, once again, I was ambassador during the time of the Osama bin Laden raid. Really, our relations hit rock bottom. The trust was very bad, and I think that the idea of working together took a hit. I think I'll give some credit to Imran Khan. I'll even give some credit to Donald Trump. I think they're talking again. That's a good thing. But I think what the American side needs to do is to think hard about what it wants to see in the region. Does it want to see the country, does it want to look at this part of the world primarily as a counterterrorism task? Counterterrorism is important. Is that the primary issue? Do we want to see development where you see a sustainable economy, an opportunity for the people of Pakistan and its neighbors, so that you will actually have a better setting for stability in the region, if indeed we have these two nuclear neighbors, India and Pakistan, or the neighbor in Afghanistan that's not as stable as it could be? Do we want to build a broader relationship with Pakistan? I'm not sure that the American debate has gone that far. Because of the disappointments of the first 20 years of this century, there's a lot of what people call Pakistan fatigue in Washington. I think this, however, this prospect of an agreement in Afghanistan and the challenge of the Pakistani-Indian relationship could allow us to try to put it on a new footing where we have a broader understanding of what the Pakistani people want, what their representatives want, whether reform is possible, and whether America can actually contribute to the long-term sustainability of democracy and peace with its neighbors in the region. I'd like to see that debate take place. I don't think we're quite there yet.
And my last question to you, Ambassador Munter, in your opinion, do you see Islamabad willing to change its strategic matrix with regards to its eastern border and western border? Do you see that happening?
I think there's a debate in Pakistan, and I'm saying this a little bit out of date. I have to admit, I've not been ambassador there for a long time. But I do travel to Pakistan, and I talk with people, including members of the military. I believe there is a debate inside the Pakistani military, among the officer corps, and in the public, about what the threat is, if indeed there is a threat to Pakistan. The traditional idea was that India is the threat to Pakistan. India is the mortal threat to Pakistani sovereignty. I don't believe that, but I think that's something that many people have thought. I think the experience that the Pakistani army has had in the frontier, in the tribal areas, with the losses they have taken, with the terror that they have experienced from the TTP and other groups, has made at least some people in Pakistan question whether the main threat to the stability and the prosperity of Pakistan is India. Maybe the threat is something else. Maybe it's, among other things, radical Islam, Al-Qaeda, and the other groups, things like that. If indeed within Pakistan, within the leadership of Pakistan, they can have that debate, what is it that will make a strong Pakistan? Part of the answer might be, at the end of the day, that a relationship with the Indians, that a relationship whereby legitimate Indian concerns, legitimate Pakistani concerns, and legitimate Chinese concerns and concerns throughout Central Asia can all be taken into account, there may be a way to change their calculus. That's a long-winded way of saying, if it's just the repeat of strategic depth, if we're still going through the same debates that we've always gone through about Pakistan mistrusting India, then I'm afraid we may be in for some very, very rough times.
Well, this also brings us to the end of this conversation. Ambassador Munter, thank you very much for your time and speaking with Voice of America today here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and all the best to you.